What's up, guys? Welcome to today's video. Today we're going to talk about why is housing expensive, everywhere in cities that are shrinking, in cities that are expanding, in cities that are stagnating, just anywhere around the world. So let's get straight to it. So housing is expensive everywhere, and if that already sounds dramatic, good because it actually deserves the drama because this isn't just a big city thing, it's definitely not just inflation or greedy landlords or some like vague supply chain issues excuse or whatever. Housing is expensive everywhere because we designed an economic system where the land is scarce, housing is treated like an investment, and the people who will benefit most from high prices are also the ones with the most political power, usually. Once you see that, it stops feeling confusing and starts feeling kind of inevitable. Let's start with the most basic fact that everything else builds on. Land is just there, same amount as yesterday, never will be more. And because people want to live near jobs, school, culture, hospitals, and other people demand for land piles up in very specific places, mainly in cities, when demand keeps rising, everything that can expand easily prices don't politely go up, they explode. Now, in theory, we could solve this by building more housing. That's the part everybody, usually agrees on. And in practice, this is where everything breaks. Housing is one of the most restricted markets in the entire economy. Not because of safety, which would make sense, but because of zoning laws. Zoning decides what you're allowed to build and where in huge parts of major cities. It is literally illegal to build dense housing, no apartments, no duplexes, no multifamily buildings, just single family homes, even when millions of people want to live nearby. And here's the key initiative problem. The people who vote on these rules are usually homeowners, and homeowners benefit from rising housing prices. That makes sense. The people who vote on these rules are usually homeowners, and homeowners benefit from rising housing prices. Their house is their biggest asset, so when the prices go up, their net worth also goes up. So they fight new construction aggressively using phrases like neighborhood character, community concerns, which usually translates to please don't build anything that might lower my property value. Sorry. Economists call this not in my backyard. And it's one of the biggest reasons supply stays artificially low. So demand keeps growing, supply is blocked by law, and prices surge. At that point, housing stops behaving like shelter and it starts behaving like a financial asset. And that shift changes, everything. Over the last few decades, housing became the main wealth building tool for the middle class. Governments encouraged this with tax breaks, cheap mortgages, and the idea that owning a home wasn't just a choice, but it was a milestone of adulthood. Buy a house, they said. It's an investment, they said. Prices always go up, they said. And when enough people believe prices always go up, the market stops being about affordability and starts being about expectations. This is where interest rates matter. When rates are low, borrowing is cheap. Monthly mortgage payments look manageable even when the total price is absurd. That allows buyers to bid more, which pushes the price higher, which then justifies even bigger loans. Cheap money doesn't make houses cheap, it makes housing expensive. Central banks didn't mean to do this, but years of low interest rates poured fuel directly into the housing market. At the same time, construction itself got more expensive. Land costs more, materials cost more, labor costs way more, permits, delays, lawsuits, and whatnot. Community opposition stretched projects out for years, and time is money. When building becomes risky and expensive, only luxury projects make financial sense. So even when cities do allow new housing, what gets built is usually high end, because that's the only way to survive the system we created. So now we're stuck with too little supply, rising demand, cheap credit, and housing that's treated like an asset first and a place to live second. Prices race ahead of wages, especially for young people, and suddenly an entire generation is locked out of cities they worked in. And that's before we even zoom out globally. Once you zoom out, it gets way worse. Because housing isn't just local anymore. Capital moves across borders, and real estate is one of the safest places in the world to park money. Apartments in major cities become stores of value, not homes. Investors buy them, sometimes leave them empty, sometimes rent them out, but either way, they're competing with local incomes using global wealth. When housing prices are set by international capital instead of local wages, affordability doesn't stand a chance. Urbanization makes this even more intense. High-paying jobs cluster in cities because being near other skilled people makes everyone more productive. Economists love this because it boosts growth. Housing markets hate it because demand skyrockets. So you end up with software engineers, nurses, teachers, baristas, and delivery drivers all competing for the same limited space. Prices sort people by income, whether anyone likes it or not, pushing essential workers farther away and turning housing into a transportation and quality of life crisis too. Demographics quietly add pressure as well. People live longer, so homes don't turn over as often. Household sizes shrink, so more housing units are needed per person. Even if population growth slows, demand would still rise. And when population does grow, especially in desirable cities, the gap widens even faster. Speculation slugs the problem in. When people expect prices to keep rising, buying a housing becomes about timing and not really about living. Flip it, rent it, leverage it. Rising prices attract more investors, which pushes price even higher, reinforcing the belief that housing is a guaranteed win. Governments try to cool this down with taxes or restrictions, but they rarely go far enough to matter because housing is too politically sensitive. Governments are terrified of failing house prices. Housing is tied to banks, pensions, and the financial system itself. So when the prices wobble, policy steps in to protect them. Lower rates, stimulus, bailouts, and whatnot. Housing crashes are treated like emergencies, while housing unaffordability is treated like background noise. That means prices are protected on the way down, but allowed to soar on the way up. The result is a system that actively rewards ownership and punishes renting, protects wealth that already exists, and makes it harder every year for new entrants to get in. Older generations experience housing as something you bought with a normal job. Younger generations experience it as something you might afford if everything goes perfectly and nothing goes wrong for 20 years, let's say. And the most ironic thing about it is that this actually hurts the economy because high housing costs stop people from moving to where jobs are. Businesses struggle to hire, productivity drops, growth slows, but those costs are spread out and invisible, while rising home prices are very visible and very personal. So politically, nothing changes. That's why housing is expensive everywhere, not because of one bad policy or one greedy group, but because of a perfectly aligned set of incentives that prioritize scarcity, protect existing wealth, and treat homes like financial instruments instead of infrastructure. Until those incentives change, prices won't meaningfully fall, and understanding that it is uncomfortable because it means this crisis isn't an accident. It's the system working exactly as designed. And this is usually where someone says, okay, but what is the solution? As if there's a clean, satisfying answer waiting at end of the video, end of the conversation. There isn't, at least not a simple one. The honest answer is that fixing housing means doing things that feel uncomfortably and politically risky. It means building a lot more housing, especially dense housing in places where people actually want to live. It means changing zoning laws that were designed to protect property values, not people. It means accepting that cities grow, change, and get taller, and that isn't a failure of planning, but the entire point of cities. It also means stopping the pretense that housing can be both a guaranteed investment and universally affordable at the same time. Those two goals directly contradict each other. If prices always go up, new buyers lose. If prices stabilize or fall, existing owners panic. So societies quietly choose rising prices and then act surprised when young people are so angry. Renters are squeezed and birth rate falls because starting a life feels financially impossible. And that's really the core of it. Housing isn't expensive because we don't know what to do. It is expensive because the people who would have to accept the biggest changes are the same people who benefit most from the things staying exactly the same way they are. Scarcity isn't a bug in the system, it's the future that makes housing profitable. So when you hear politicians argue about housing, pay attention to what they say and what they don't say. Do they talk about zoning, density, supply at a scale, or do they just talk about helping buyers compete in an already broken market? Because helping people bid against each other for too few homes doesn't solve a shortage. It just drives prices higher and then calls it assistance. Housing is expensive everywhere because we collectively decided over decades to treat homes like wealth machines instead of places to live. And until that decision changes, no amount of small fixes, clever slogans, or temporary relief is going to make this feel any better. And that's not pessimism, that's just economics. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like the video, and comment. Bye.